From the Society Dispatches of Lady Thistlewick, April 3rd, 1820. The London season unfurls once more, all lace, longing, and thinly veiled ambition. Our young ladies sharpen smiles as if they were sabres, and our gentlemen don't stand a chance. Among this year's hopefuls, one Miss Juliet Harrow has returned from the countryside, armed with little more than charm and determination to repair her family's fallen name. Mayfair, I advise you polish your silver and your stories, for if history teaches us anything, it's that nothing gleams quite so bright as a second chance. The chandeliers of the Worthington ballroom blazed like captured starlight. Beneath them, the ton glittered and swirled ribbons, lace, and gossip in motion. Miss Juliet Harrow paused just inside the doorway, fingers tightening on her dance card. The hum of conversation and the clinking of glass felt like a physical force pressing against her ribs. Her aunt, Mrs. Harrow, fluttered her fan like a general marshalling troops. "Smile, dear," she murmured. "Not too wide. We are hopeful, not hysterical." Juliet forced a modest grin. "I should hate to appear desperate for a husband." "Desperate?" Her aunt sniffed. "My love, you'd be fortunate to appear interesting." Juliet sighed, scanning the crowd. Lords and ladies shimmered like spun sugar, every smile calculated. Somewhere, beyond the press of feathers and perfume, the orchestra struck a bright, commanding note. She took a steadying breath, gathered her courage, and collided headlong into a tall gentleman carrying a glass of champagne. The liquid arced through the air in a glorious, sparkling cascade before baptizing his immaculate black coat. "Oh no!" she gasped. "I'm terribly sorry, your sleeve, it's soaked." The gentleman looked down, his dark brows lifting slightly. His voice was deep and steady, the kind that could scold or seduce, depending on the angle of the words. "Indeed," he said, "it seems my drink has developed a will of its own." Juliet snatched a napkin from a passing tray and dabbed helplessly. Oh dear, it's worse than I thought." He caught her wrist gently, stopping her frantic efforts. "Please, I'd rather drown than endure further assistance." She froze, then burst out laughing. "You may yet, if you stand still much longer." A corner of his mouth twitched. "Then you suggest I flee?" "I suggest you forgive me," she said, straightening with a spark of defiance. "Consider it done." He inclined his head with cool civility. "Lord Blackwell." "Juliet Harrow," she replied, curtsying with a hint of grace. "Of the Wiltshire Harrows." His expression softened just slightly. "Ah, the family who once owned half of Wiltshire?" "Only the interesting half," she quipped before she could stop herself. To her astonishment, a genuine smile tugged at his lips, brief, but undeniably real. Across the room, Lady Lavinia Pembroke's jewelled fan paused mid-flutter. A ripple of whispering began, like wind stirring tall grass. The disgraced Miss Harrow and the elusive Lord Blackwell, how delicious. The orchestra shifted to another waltz. "Shall I make my apologies to your coat?" Juliet offered, her cheeks warm. "I fear the coat is beyond saving," he said dryly. "But your contrition is accepted, though I must find a replacement before the scent of champagne attracts poets." "I hear eau de Moet is terribly fashionable," she teased. That earned her another flicker of amusement before he turned away, heading toward the exit with long, deliberate strides. Later that night, as carriages rattled over cobblestones and the music faded into memory, Juliet leaned against the seat of her aunt's coach. Her aunt tutted softly. Juliet, really? Dousing a marquis with champagne on your first evening? He'll never forget you. I should hope not, Juliet murmured, gazing out the window. It's such a rare skill to make a dreadful first impression. But despite herself, she smiled. Lord Blackwell's brief grin, that unexpected crack in his composure, replayed in her mind. She had come to London to mend her family's name, not to trade smiles with men who could ruin it further. And yet, that single exchange had felt different, curious, unsettling, alive. Juliet didn't know then that her collision with Lord Adrian Blackwell would be discussed at every tea table by morning, nor that Lady Thistlewick's quill had already been dipped in ink. The season had begun, and secrets were about to bloom. The following morning dawned bright and merciless, the sort of sunlight that made hangovers and regrets shimmer like jewels. London's elite had already begun its favorite sport, remembering what everyone else had done the night before. Juliet Harrow, however, awoke to find her name already famous, or rather infamous. Juliet! Aunt Harriet's voice rang through the townhouse, shrill with excitement. You've made the dispatch, Juliet groaned from beneath her pillow. Oh, good. Perhaps they've announced my swift return to Wiltshire. Her aunt bustled in, rustling the crisp pages of the morning paper. Listen to this. A certain young lady, recently returned from rustic exile, made quite the splash last night. Lord Blackwell's coat may never recover, but his interest, some whisper, certainly might. Juliet sat up so fast the pillow fell to the floor. They cannot mean me. Of course they do, dear, Harriet said with pride. I told you all publicity is good publicity. Unless it ruins one's marriage prospects or improves them, her aunt countered cheerfully. Blackwell is unmarried, wealthy, and, by all accounts, as handsome as sin. Juliet groaned. Wonderful, my life reduced to a puddle of gossip and champagne. But as the day wore on, and the household maid returned from the grocer with whispers that Miss Harrow and Lord Blackwell were on everyone's lips, Juliet felt a strange flutter of something between dread and anticipation. That afternoon, Lord Adrian Blackwell was not thinking about Juliet Harrow, or so he told himself. He sat in his study, sunlight glancing off cut-glass decanters and stacks of neglected correspondence. His butler, Havers, lingered politely at the door. Will you be attending the Pembroke Musicale this evening, my lord? Adrian gave a non-committal grunt. Music, chatter, and matchmaking, what could possibly tempt me? Havers cleared his throat delicately. The dispatch reports you have already found temptation in the form of Miss Harrow. Adrian glanced up sharply. They printed that. I'm afraid so, my lord. With enthusiasm. He exhaled through his nose, a quiet, dangerous sound. I attend one blasted ball, and London makes a novel of it. Havers hesitated. Perhaps, sir, the lady's reputation. I did nothing to her reputation. Indeed, my lord, yet the ton may not require your assistance to do so. Adrian's jaw tightened. He had spent years avoiding scandal for his own sake and for his family's. Ever since his father's debts and his brother's betrayal had dragged the Blackwell name through every drawing-room in London. He'd rebuilt their estates, repaid every creditor, and sworn never again to be fodder for gossip. And now, one evening, one laugh, one spilled glass of champagne, prepare the carriage, he said abruptly. We're going to the musicale. By evening, The Pembroke townhouse was a blaze of candles and chatter. Strings thrummed, sopranos warbled, and the scent of roses and scandal perfumed the air. Juliet, seated near the back, did her best to look unbothered. Her gown, a pale lavender chosen to seem modest, had already drawn approving glances and a few smug whispers from ladies who clearly wished they'd thought of it first. "Smile, dear," Aunt Harriet murmured. "And remember, you are a tragic heroine, not a criminal defendant." Juliet tried to laugh, but the air left her lungs the moment Lord Blackwell entered the room. He was dressed impeccably, his dark hair catching the light, his expression unreadable. Conversations dimmed slightly as he passed, as though the tun itself held its breath. Juliet pretended to examine her gloves. He stopped beside her row. "Miss Harrow," he said quietly, bowing, "I trust your evening is less perilous without champagne nearby." She met his gaze, unable to suppress a smile. "I've sworn off beverages entirely." "Prudent. Are you here to restore your reputation or ruin mine further?" "Perhaps both," he murmured. A few nearby heads turned at their exchange, enough to make Juliet blush. But his eyes, steady and amused, seemed to see straight through her nerves. "I owe you an apology," he said under his breath, "for the column, not the incident." "You didn't write it," she said softly. "No," he replied, "but my name appears in ink beside yours, and that has consequences." The sincerity in his tone surprised her. "You speak as though gossip is a weapon." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "In London it is." Before she could respond, the first notes of a piano concerto began. The audience hushed. Juliet faced forward, though her heart still beat faster than the music. Throughout the performance, she felt his gaze drift her way, not constant, but enough that her awareness sharpened. It was a strange, giddy feeling. She was supposed to be careful, proper, strategic. But for the first time since arriving in London, she felt seen. When the final applause swelled, Blackwell leaned close enough that his words brushed her ear. "Walk with me after." Juliet hesitated only a heartbeat. "You mean to scandalize the street as well as the ballroom?" He smiled. "I find the air clearer beyond the walls." And before her aunt could object, before reason could prevail, Juliet found herself stepping into the night beside him under a sky full of stars that seemed far too bright for London. Outside, the street was quiet but alive, with carriage lights and the faint scent of rain. They walked without speaking for several moments, their pace unhurried. Finally, she said softly, "You don't seem the sort who enjoys these events." "I don't," he admitted, "but I enjoy disrupting them." She laughed. "Then you've chosen an excellent accomplice." He glanced at her sidelong. "You don't frighten easily, do you, Miss Harrow?" "Not when I'm already halfway to social ruin." That earned her a low, genuine chuckle, the kind that warmed her chest more than she liked to admit. As they neared the corner, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Adrian looked up. "It seems the heavens disapprove. Or perhaps they're applauding," she said, lifting her chin to the drizzle now falling lightly around them. And in that rain, under the faint gaslight, something shifted, not a declaration, not a promise, but a quiet understanding. Two people, each carrying the weight of past mistakes, finding something unexpectedly alive in each other's company. When they parted at her carriage, Adrian bowed. "Good evening, Miss Harrow." "Good evening, Lord Blackwell," she said, though her heart whispered something else entirely. From the Society Dispatches of Lady Thistlewick, April 10th, 1820. The city's appetite for romance remains delightfully insatiable. After the incident of champagne and charm, it seems Miss Juliet Harrow and Lord Blackwell cannot enter a room without raising the collective pulse of Mayfair. Whether they are courting, quarrelling, or simply colliding again by fate's mischievous hand, I recommend every hostess keep an extra bottle chilled for the next explosion. Juliet Harrow had sworn to ignore the papers. Truly, she had. But there it was again, her name, printed in elegant italics, nestled among talk of dukes and dowries. She groaned and pushed the newspaper aside. It's becoming a serial novel. Soon they'll be assigning me chapter titles. Aunt Harriet sipped her tea serenely. And readership is excellent, I hear. The postman nearly fainted from curiosity this morning. I'm mortified, Juliet said, burying her face in her hands. Rubbish, you're famous. All you need now is to marry well before your reputation catches up. Juliet peeked through her fingers. Aunt Harriet, that's terrible advice. Her aunt smiled sweetly. My dear, it's the only advice London understands. Across town, Lord Adrian Blackwell was rereading the same column with a grimace. I see we've graduated from rumor to serialized entertainment, he muttered. Havers, his long-suffering butler, poured the morning coffee. At least the review is favorable, my lord. The lady is described as charming, and you as broodingly intriguing. Adrian shot him a look. Do I pay you to summarize gossip? No, my lord. That service is complimentary. Despite himself, Adrian smiled. I suppose the only remedy is to appear publicly unenthralled. Indeed, sir, Havers said. And how will you achieve that? By staying home. An excellent plan, Havers said dryly. Pity you've already accepted the Duke of Linfield's invitation for tonight. Adrian froze. The garden party? Yes, my lord, the one society insists is unmissable. Adrian groaned. Then we'll go and be as dull as possible. Of course, said Havers. You always say that before something explodes. The Duke of Linfield's midnight garden party was the sort of affair that poets pretended to despise while attending eagerly. Lanterns floated like captive stars among the hedges, fountains glittered under moonlight, and the air smelled faintly of roses and scandal. Juliet arrived in a gown of soft lavender silk that caught the lamplight like dew. If her intention was to blend in, it failed spectacularly. Walk with poise, dear, Aunt Harriet instructed, clutching her fan. And if anyone asks about Lord Blackwell, laugh mysteriously. It drives them mad. Juliet laughed nervously. And if he's actually here, then laugh less mysteriously. The crowd shimmered with gossip and perfume. Laughter floated between rose bushes. A string quartet played beneath a wisteria arch. Juliet was reaching for a glass of lemonade when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Let's hope you're less dangerous with this beverage. She turned, and there he was, Lord Blackwell, impeccably dressed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes unmistakably amused. Lord Blackwell, she said, startled into a smile, you risk your reputation speaking to me again. Ah, he said, accepting a glass from a passing footman. But my reputation and I rarely agree. Juliet tried not to laugh. Perhaps it's your reputation writing to Lady Thistlewick, then. I'd burn the paper first, he said, tone dry. Good heavens, that sounds almost romantic. Then I've clearly gone wrong somewhere, he replied with mock solemnity. Their exchange was easy, too easy. Juliet found herself smiling more than she should, enjoying the faint warmth of mischief. The quartet struck up a waltz, and couples drifted to the lantern-lit clearing. Adrian extended a hand. "Miss Harrow," he said quietly, "would you do me the honor of ignoring the gossips for one dance?" She hesitated. "Only one? Let's begin there." She took his hand, and the world seemed to still. The waltz began, smooth and lilting. His hand rested at her waist, steady and confident. Beneath the glow of floating lanterns, their movements found perfect rhythm, though Juliet was certain her heart did not. "You dance well," he murmured. "You sound surprised." "Only impressed." She met his gaze, daring, teasing. "And you? Always this charming when you're not brooding." "Only when cornered," he said, earning her laugh again. They circled the garden, music and murmurs weaving around them. For a moment, the noise of London, its judgment, its endless whispering seemed to fade. "Tell me something true," she said softly. He looked at her, genuinely caught off guard. "Something true?" "Yes, not the sort of truth you tell at dinner parties." He was silent for a moment, then said, "I don't sleep well. I wake thinking of what I should have done differently for my family, for my name. It's tiresome company." Juliet blinked, surprised by the quiet honesty. "Then you're not the only one losing sleep. I've spent years thinking of what I could have done better too, though. In my case, there's less money and more mortification." He smiled faintly. "You have more courage than most who never fell from grace." She tilted her head. "And you have a curious way of giving compliments." "Practice," he said. They were both laughing when Lady Lavinia Pembroke's voice sliced through the air like a stiletto. My, what a picture! Miss Harrow and Lord Blackwell again. You do keep society entertained." Juliet stiffened. "Lady Lavinia." Lavinia smiled sweetly. "I should thank you, my dear. You've made the gossip columns positively thrilling. And what a clever gown. The perfect color for innocence, almost convincing." Adrian's jaw flexed. "Lady Lavinia, your talent for poison is wasted on flowers." "Oh, I quite enjoy both," Lavinia said, eyes glinting. "Do excuse me, I must find Lady Thistlewick's messenger before the night grows dull." She drifted away, leaving the air cold in her wake. Juliet swallowed. "Well, that should guarantee tomorrow's column." Adrian exhaled slowly. "Let her write. If the worst they can say is that I danced with you, I'll count myself fortunate." Juliet turned to him, half smiling despite the sting. "Careful, my lord. You sound dangerously close to gallant." "Then I'll make amends," he said lightly, offering her another lemonade. "No scandal there." She took it, their fingers brushing for a heartbeat, and the faintest smile curved her lips. "We'll see about that." From the Society Dispatches of Lady Thistlewick, April 12th, 1820. It seems Miss Juliet Harrow and Lord Blackwell have become London's favourite duet, waltzing beneath the moon, as if their reputations were made of air. Lady Lavinia Pembroke was kind enough to report their closeness, though one suspects her generosity ends there. Whether love or folly binds these two, I find myself deliciously undecided, and that, dear readers, is the finest form of suspense. Juliet had never known silence could hum. Her aunt's drawing room, usually alive with gossip and the tinkling of teacups, felt thick with unspoken dread. The latest dispatches lay on the table. Lady Thistlewick's elegant scrawl encircling Juliet's name once again like ivy. Aunt Harriet cleared her throat. "Well," she said at last, "I did ask for excitement this season." Juliet groaned. "I would happily trade it for obscurity." "Nonsense. Every eligible man in London will want to know you now." "For the wrong reasons," her aunt shrugged delicately. "My dear, the wrong reasons are often the right beginnings." Juliet tried not to laugh and failed. "You sound like Lady Thistlewick herself." "I'll take that as a compliment," Harriet said, returning serenely to her embroidery. The knock on the door startled them both. A footman entered, looking faintly alarmed. "A visitor, miss." "Lord Blackwell." Juliet blinked. "Here?" Aunt Harriet's needle froze mid-air. "How scandalous. Send him in immediately." "Aunt!" "Don't aunt me, child. A woman should never waste a good scandal." Adrian entered, looking far too composed for a man under social siege. He bowed politely to Aunt Harriet, then met Juliet's gaze, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "Miss Harrow, I thought it only courteous to deliver my condolences in person." "For which part?" she asked. "The dance, the column, or Lady Lavinia's shriek?" "All three," he said gravely. "And possibly the wisteria I nearly tripped over." Despite herself, Juliet laughed. "You shouldn't have come." "I know. That's what makes it worthwhile." Aunt Harriet made a soft sound of approval. "Finally, a man with sense." Juliet shot her a look. "Aunt, please." Adrian coughed into his hand to disguise a smile. "I assure you I came only to offer assistance. Lavinia's gossip has teeth, and I suspect she means to bite harder." Juliet's amusement dimmed. "You think she'll continue?" "I know she will. She dislikes you on principle and me out of habit." "That sounds exhausting." "It is. I'd offer to duel her, but society frowns on pistol fire at garden parties." Juliet sighed, rubbing her temple. "I can't fight her. I don't even know where to begin." "Then let me." She looked up. "You?" He nodded. "Lavinia thrives on humiliation, so we'll give her something else, confusion. The surest way to dull gossip is to make it sound absurd." Juliet blinked. "You want to outwit the gossips." "It's a family tradition," he said dryly. "My mother once convinced half of Sussex that I'd run off to join the clergy just to stop them talking about my brother's elopement." Juliet stared at him. "Did it work?" "Mostly, until they saw me at the races." Her laughter bubbled out before she could stop it. "I can't decide if you're mad or brilliant. I like to think I'm both in equal measure." Aunt Harriet leaned forward, eyes alight. "I do adore a conspiracy. Do carry on." Adrian smiled. "Simple enough, will appear entirely unaffected. Lavinia's words only wound if we flinch. In public, we'll be cordial." "Cordial?" Juliet repeated skeptically. "Yes, perhaps even friendly." Juliet crossed her arms. "That sounds dangerous." He raised a brow. "More dangerous than allowing Lavinia to write your ruin?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Very well, but if this ends with my name in another headline, I'll write the retraction myself." Juliet gave him a look. "You can write. Fluently, I'm told. Then you're already more useful than half the men in London." Aunt Harriet laughed outright. "Children, please. If you're going to stage a scandal, do it fashionably. By afternoon, Half of Mayfair had heard that Lord Blackwell had been seen calling on Miss Harrow twice and left smiling. The notion that he smiled was apparently the most shocking part. By evening, Juliet could feel the whispers shifting, turning uncertain. The same tongues that had hissed ruin now murmured, perhaps romance. And Lavinia Pembroke, upon hearing that Lord Blackwell had publicly defended Miss Harrow's grace and character, snapped the handle off her fan. At dinner that night, Adrian found a note tucked beneath his dessert spoon. The handwriting was neat, the ink a shade too bold. If you insist on courting danger, my lord, at least have the decency to do it beautifully. J.H. He smiled, really smiled for the first time that week. Havers, observing this rare phenomenon, murmured, "Shall I alert the newspapers, sir?" Adrian folded the note. Heaven forbid. Lady Thistlewick would have far too much fun. From the Society Dispatches of Lady Thistlewick, April 15th, 1820. Certain young ladies learn deportment from governesses, conversation from their mothers, and discretion from no one at all. Yet, if Miss Juliet Harrow continues her present streak, she may soon teach London how to fall from grace elegantly. Juliet hadn't meant to knock over the inkpot. But in her defense, the table in Lady Thistlewick's drawing room was already an obstacle course of papers, ribbons, and scandal. Every available surface was buried in letters and half-finished columns, and at the centre sat Lady Aurelia Thistlewick, in violet silk and a mood that could curdle milk. "Sit," she said, not looking up from her notes. Juliet obeyed, trying to appear less like a condemned prisoner and more like a social curiosity. Lady Thistlewick's quill paused mid-sentence. "You're paler than a debutante at her first quadrille." "Tea, please," Juliet managed. "Good, you'll need hydration. You've been positively devoured in print." Juliet winced. "I noticed." The older woman finally glanced up, eyes gleaming like a cat's in candlelight. "Oh, don't look so tragic. I've been much worse once I was accused of dancing barefoot on a billiard table." Juliet blinked. "Did you?" "Of course not." A delicate sip of tea. "It was a piano." Juliet sputtered a laugh before she could stop herself. "There, that's better," Lady Thistlewick said, satisfied. "If you can laugh at your own ruin, you're halfway to surviving it." Juliet hesitated. "Why invite me here, my lady? Surely you don't need lessons in infamy." Aurelia smiled faintly. "Because, my dear, I dislike amateurs. And you, Miss Harrow, are stumbling towards scandal without the faintest idea how to use it." Juliet frowned. "You make it sound like a weapon." "It is, and one must decide whether to brandish it or be impaled by it." She set down her cup and leaned forward conspiratorially. "Tell me, what do you want?" Juliet hesitated. "To restore my family's reputation." "How dull," Lady Thistlewick said at once. "Try again." Juliet blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. No one survives in this city by wanting to be respectable. What do you truly want?" Juliet's lips parted, then closed again. The answer lodged somewhere deep in her throat, half-formed and stubborn. "I want to be seen," she said softly at last. "Not pitied, not dismissed, seen." Lady Thistlewick's expression softened just a fraction. "Ah, now that's interesting." For the next hour, the notorious columnist instructed her like a general preparing for battle. "Rule 1, she began, pacing the room. "Never chase gossip Let it chase you. Mystery is the Tun's favorite perfume. Juliet scribbled notes, frowning. But how do I cultivate mystery? By refusing to explain yourself. Ever. Explanation is death, even when I'm innocent, especially then. Rule 2. Humor is armor. A clever remark can cut deeper than outrage. Juliet looked up. You mean like you do in your columns? Lady Thistlewick smiled. My dear, I merely provide the stage. It's the players who bring the drama. Rule 3, she continued, lowering her voice. Choose your allies wisely. People love a fallen woman until she stands taller than they do. Juliet felt a chill. That sounds rather lonely. Of course it is, the older woman said gently. But it's also the price of survival. By the time Juliet left, her head spun with advice, contradictions, and far too much tea. Lady Thistlewick saw her to the door. Oh, and Miss Harrow? Yes, if you must fall in love, she said lightly, make certain it's worth printing. Juliet smiled faintly. And if it isn't, then make certain it's worth remembering. As Juliet stepped into the fading light, she couldn't decide if she'd been mentored or warned. But one thing was certain, she had changed. The timid girl who entered Lady Thistlewick's salon had been armed with hope and naivety. The one who left carried something sharper, intent. That evening, Adrian found her in the Harrows' garden, scribbling furiously in a notebook. Planning your next apology, he teased. Hardly. My first lesson in scandal etiquette. He raised a brow. You had a lesson? With Lady Thistlewick herself. Adrian groaned. Good God, she'll have you hosting masked dinner parties by Thursday. Juliet smirked. No masks, but perhaps a touch of mystery. He leaned closer, voice low. Then I must be careful. Mystery suits you far too well. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and felt her pulse stumble. Careful, Lord Blackwell, she murmured. Lady Thistlewick says love is best when it ruins something. Then we're halfway there, he said softly. And somewhere in the distance, a quill scratched over paper Lady Thistlewick, smiling to herself as she wrote, For it appears Miss Harrow has learned quickly that scandal, like love, is only dangerous when one pretends not to enjoy it. Lady Thistlewick's society paper, June the 15th. In every ballroom there are dancers and then there are duelists. One wields grace, the other gossip. And tonight, dear readers, both were on dazzling display at the Montgomery Musicale, where a certain Miss Harrow and Lord Blackwell appear to have waltzed directly into the Tun's most fevered imaginations. The Montgomery Musicale glittered like a fairy lantern, gold chandeliers, satin gowns, and an orchestra that seemed determined to outshine heaven itself. Juliet Harrow sat at the pianoforte, every note she played rippling through the hush of the salon. For once, she wasn't thinking of perfection. She was thinking of him, of the tall, dark-haired man standing near the French doors, watching her with a gaze so intent it might have set sheet music aflame. Lord Adrian Blackwell looked the part of indifference. One gloved hand tucked behind his back, but Juliet had come to know that small, telltale quirk of his mouth when he was trying not to smile. And tonight, it was there. When the final chord faded, applause burst like rain on glass. Juliet rose, curtsied, and tried not to beam too obviously at Adrian's approving nod. Lady Lavinia Pembroke, however, clapped with the enthusiasm of a wilted fern. Quite accomplished, she murmured to her neighbor, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. If one enjoys provincial simplicity, Juliet caught the comment, but only lifted her chin a fraction higher. Let her whisper, she thought. I'd rather be simple than sour. Later, amid the swirl of conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes, Adrian found her by the refreshment table. Miss Harrow, he said, his tone teasing, I nearly applauded before you finished your final note. That last crescendo was perilously close to heart, stopping. Then, I must play with caution, my lord, she replied. It would be quite the scandal if I felled a Blackwell with nothing but a B minor. He laughed softly, that deep, unguarded laugh that always made her heart stutter. I'd die a contented man. Please don't, she said with mock alarm. Lady Lavinia would never forgive me for the attention. He tilted his head, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Shall we give her something else to fret about? The night air is pleasant. They slipped into the garden, lanterns floating above trimmed hedges like captive stars. The music indoors faded to a murmur. Adrian offered his arm. She took it, fingers brushing silk. Do you ever tire of them? She asked quietly. The whispers, the weighing of every glance? Endlessly, he said, though I confess some whispers are rather pleasant. She laughed. Flattery doesn't suit you, my lord. Then I'll practice, he murmured, stepping closer. They stopped beneath a rose arch, the scent thick and sweet. Music drifted faintly from the open doors. Would you dance? He asked. Here? Why not? I doubt Lady Lavinia dares venture into the fresh air. It might wrinkle her envy. Juliet's laughter was soft and helpless. You're insufferable. And you're smiling, he said, placing a gentle hand at her waist. They moved slowly, steps guided by the memory of a waltz rather than its rhythm. She felt his breath near her temple, his heartbeat beneath fine fabric, the world narrowing to one impossible moment of almost. A voice cut through the night like a cold breeze. Well, this is intimate. Lady Lavinia stood at the edge of the lantern light, her smile sharper than any fan. Miss Harrow, she drawled, what a spirited approach to courtship. I do hope you're not presuming upon Lord Blackwell's kindness. Adrian's expression didn't flicker. Lady Lavinia, your concern for propriety does you credit, though I can't imagine the Ton electing you their guardian saint. Juliet's eyes widened, but Adrian continued smoothly. We were simply dancing. I believe even jealousy can't outlaw that. Lavinia's fan snapped shut. You'll regret impertinence, my lord. The Ton has long memories. Then let us pray they also have short attention spans, he said pleasantly. With a sniff, she swept back toward the house, lace rustling like thunderclouds. Juliet turned to him, mortified. You shouldn't have said that. I most certainly should have, he replied. If I didn't, she'd have found a way to make you the villain of her next supper. Perhaps she will anyway. Then I'll simply have to keep you too busy dancing to notice. Her laughter bubbled out, half in relief, half in disbelief. You're impossible. Entirely, he agreed, smiling down at her. But you seem to tolerate me nonetheless. Their eyes met again longer this time. The air between them grew charged, fragile, perfect. And then, from inside the house, came a burst of applause and the high trill of a soprano. Juliet exhaled, half laughing. The universe is a dreadful chaperone. Then we'll have to outsmart it, he murmured, pressing a light kiss to her gloved hand before leading her back inside. By the following morning, Half of London had apparently been in the Montgomery garden that night or so, the gossip claimed. Whispers fluttered through drawing rooms. Miss Harrow ensnared him. He defended her honor. They danced alone, unsupervised. Lady Lavinia, of course, was their most enthusiastic witness, but her embellishments only made the story sparkle brighter. And when Lady Thistlewick's next column appeared, it concluded with a single wicked line. Jealousy, my dear readers, is simply admiration in its most unflattering dress. And if admiration were currency, Miss Harrow would be the wealthiest lady in London. The weather had decided to be beautiful, a rare mercy during the London season. The Pembrokes garden glittered with parasols, crystal lemonade, and gossip. Every lady had come dressed in pastels, fluttering like butterflies. But butterflies, as Juliet Harrow was quickly learning, could be ruthless creatures when the nectar of scandal was nearby. Lady Lavinia Pembroke, resplendent in lavender silk, presided over the afternoon tea with all the sweetness of arsenic in sugar. Her laughter floated above the chatter like a silver bell that somehow chilled the air. And Juliet, invited almost as an afterthought, sat at the edge of the gathering, trying not to mind the pointed glances. Across the lawn, Lord Adrian Blackwell was engaged in conversation with an elderly viscount who seemed to be lecturing him about rose cultivation. Adrian's patience, Juliet noticed, was saintly. He caught her eye once, offered a conspiratorial wink, and somehow that tiny gesture gave her courage enough to lift her teacup and smile as though she belonged there. Miss Harrow, cooed Lady Lavinia, drifting toward her like a well-dressed storm. I trust you've recovered from the excitement of the Montgomery musicale. Juliet returned her smile with practiced politeness. Perfectly, Lady Lavinia. It was such a lively evening. Indeed, one hears it was particularly lively in the garden. A ripple of laughter moved through the ladies nearby. Juliet's fingers tightened on her cup. The night air was refreshing, she said calmly. I recommend it to anyone feeling overheated by conversation. The response was so serenely delivered that even Lavinia's painted lashes fluttered. Well, Lavinia said after a pause, not all of us have your boldness. I find courage and good posture are equally useful, Juliet replied. A few stifled laughs broke out. Lavinia's lips pinched. Across the garden, Adrian had noticed. He excused himself from the Viscount, crossed the lawn, and stopped beside Juliet's chair with the smooth timing of a hero who had read the script in advance. Lady Lavinia, he said, bowing slightly, your garden is exquisite, though I dare say Miss Harrow's composure might outshine your roses. The compliment landed, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Juliet blushed. Lavinia nearly glowed with restrained fury. How gallant of you, Lavinia said coolly. You do so enjoy rescuing damsels, my lord. Only when they're worth rescuing, he said lightly, his smile all ease and mischief. The conversation around them froze for half a breath, then scattered into forced chatter. Lavinia gave a brittle laugh, declared she must see to her guests, and swept off, her gown rustling like an offended peacock. Juliet exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You do enjoy stepping into battles uninvited, she murmured. I prefer to think of it as strategic interference, he said. Besides, I can't have anyone mistaking silence for guilt. She looked up at him, her expression softening. You didn't have to. I could have managed. Oh, I know you could have, he said quietly. That's rather why I did. There was something so sincere in the way he said it, that for a heartbeat, the laughter, the garden, even the whisper of the wind faded away. He offered her his arm. "Come, Miss Harrow. Allow me to show you the roses that were the topic of great debate a few minutes ago. I've promised to appreciate them, though I confess they pale beside your composure." She took his arm despite herself, trying not to smile. "You'll turn me vain, Lord Blackwell. That seems an admirable goal." They strolled along the path, bordered with peonies and climbing blooms. For a while, they didn't speak, letting the soft hum of bees and distant chatter fill the quiet. Then Juliet said, "Do you ever wonder if we'll be remembered for what we do, or only for what others say we do?" He glanced at her, thoughtful. "In my experience, what they say fades. What we feel doesn't." Juliet's heart fluttered at the simplicity of it. "That's quite unguarded of you, my lord." "I'm afraid I've been terribly unguarded lately," he said. "You seem to have that effect." Before she could answer, a burst of laughter rose from behind them, Lavinia's voice, unmistakable. "Do be careful, Miss Harrow," Lavinia called sweetly from her table. "Roses have thorns." Juliet turned back, smiled brilliantly, and replied, "So do ladies, Lady Lavinia, though I find it's usually the insecure ones who prick first." A moment of stunned silence. Then several young debutantes tittered into their gloves. Adrian tried, and failed, to stifle his laughter. "Remind me never to cross you, Miss Harrow," he said under his breath. "Then we shall remain the best of friends," she replied, eyes bright. By the end of the afternoon, Juliet's name was once again on every tongue, but this time not as scandal, but as sensation. The tale spread that she had faced down Lady Lavinia with elegance and wit, that Lord Blackwell had stood at her side, that perhaps, just perhaps, a new power couple had been born under the Tun's watchful gaze. And in her next dispatch, Lady Thistlewick wrote, "It seems Miss Harrow has mastered that most delicate of social arts, the duel by teacup. For every barb, a smile. For every rumour, a perfectly measured reply. And if Lord Blackwell continues to linger in her orbit, one suspects the season may end with less gossip and more poetry." Lady Thistlewick's Society Paper, July the 12th. The season pirouettes toward its end, my dear readers, and London salons shimmer, as always, with silk, suspicion, and subtle conquest. But of all the tales unfolding tonight, it is hearts laid bare, unmasked, and unafraid that may prove the most scintillating. Keep your lorgnettes polished, for the final ball promises more than music and manners. The Whitmore Estates ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and pastel gowns, the scent of roses and fine perfume thick in the warm evening air. Every debutante floated in silk and hope, while matrons whispered behind fans. Juliet Harrow stepped through the doors, her gown a soft rose with threads of gold. She felt every eye upon her, but when Adrian Blackwell emerged from the crowd, all else blurred. His gaze held hers immediately warm, intent, almost disbelieving in its admiration. He crossed the room with ease, bowing before her. "Miss Harrow," he said, low and charming, "you make the room seem unbearably small." "Then we must dance to stretch it," she replied, offering her hand with a playful lift of her chin. The orchestra began a slow waltz. They moved together, steps perfectly aligned yet unstudied. Juliet's laughter echoed softly, Adrian's deep chuckle under her ear. The crowd receded, leaving them suspended in a world of silk, candlelight, and unspoken promises. "You're staring, Lord Blackwell," Juliet murmured, breath fluttering. "I'm merely collecting evidence," he said, fingers brushing hers, "that a lady can outshine a dozen chandeliers." She smiled, heart quickening. "Flattery is dangerous, only when undeserved," he murmured, leaning just a whisper closer. The music ended. Applause rippled faintly across the room, but neither noticed. On the terrace, lanterns glimmered above the marble balustrades, throwing soft light on the blooming jasmine. Before either could speak, Lady Lavinia Pembroke's delicate but deliberate footsteps echoed. She arrived with a saccharine smile. "Lord Blackwell," she said, her tone honeyed but sharp, "I feel obliged to offer a word of caution." Adrian straightened, eyes narrowing just enough to be dangerous, yet polite. "Indeed?" he said lightly. "And what caution might that be, Lady Lavinia?" "That Miss Harrow, well, that she must be careful," Lavinia began, "for a gentleman's reputation can be as delicate as a lady's—" "Ah," Adrian interrupted smoothly, one eyebrow lifted. "Thank you for your concern, but I assure you, Miss Harrow's courage and wit far exceed any danger posed by whispers or tea-room musings. If anyone must be cautious, it would be those who attempt to hinder her charm." Lavinia's lips tightened, her composure cracking under the gentle precision of his rebuke. "You are bold," she said, faltering. "Bold enough to defend what is worthy," Adrian replied, "and to ensure that no one mistakes admiration for scandal." With a faint, forced laugh, Lavinia swept back toward the ballroom. Adrian turned to Juliet, brushing a loose curl from her cheek with a touch that lingered, gentle and reverent. Juliet's pulse raced. "I thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said softly, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "It is far easier to admire from a distance, but I could not let her diminish you tonight." She smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "Then I shall forever be in your debt." "Hardly debt," he said, leaning just a little closer. "More a matter of preference." The garden was quiet now, except for the faint hum of the distant orchestra. Adrian took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Juliet," he said, voice low and steady, "I've tried to be the proper gentleman, to wait until the right moment. But the truth is, I cannot wait any longer." Her breath caught. "What truth?" "That I am entirely devoted to you," he confessed, eyes shining. "And that devotion makes patience impossible." She met his gaze, heart pounding. "Then you must take the risk," she murmured, a smile trembling on her lips. He leaned closer, their foreheads nearly touching, and for a moment the world outside the terrace ceased to exist. His fingers cupped her cheek as she did the same to his. And then, at last, their lips met. It was a kiss both tender and inevitable, slow, sure, and warm, carrying the weight of weeks of longing, glances, and unspoken confessions. Juliet's hands rested on his chest as his arms circled her waist, holding her steady in the glow of lantern light. When they finally parted, the silence was alive with promise. "I love you," he whispered, voice husky. "And I, you," she replied softly, smiling through the thrill that still fluttered through her chest. "Then, let tomorrow's papers record what they may," he said, brushing his lips briefly against hers again. "Tonight, we have truth." Juliet laughed quietly, leaning into him. "A scandal for tomorrow, a certainty for tonight." Lady Thistlewick's final dispatch of the season. Dearest readers, the season closes not with scandal, but with sincerity. Miss Juliet Harrow has proven that courage, wit, and a steady heart conquer the loudest gossip. Lord Blackwell has finally found a match for mind, heart, and if I may say spirit. Let us remember, fashions fade, fortunes fluctuate, and rumors scatter, but love, honest and unafraid, never goes out of style. Lady Thistlewick.